everybody, and welcome back to the John Schofield Trust Podcast, a space for early career, aspiring and working journalists to get advice and insights into the industry. I'm your host, Bethany Lee, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Ros Atkins. And as you can see, we're kind of in a bit of a makeshift space. This is not our usual studio, and that's because we're here for the Trust's regional event in Cornwall. And we've found a little corner of the event space to do a little interview before it all kicks off. So yeah, are you excited?
Thanks for having me, Bethany. I'm very excited. I grew up not very far from here, about 4 or 5 miles away from Falmouth, and I know this high street incredibly well. I know Falmouth incredibly well. So it's when the Trust said, do you fancy doing an event in Falmouth? I didn't have to think about it for that long, to be honest.
No, always a nice chance to come home.
Yeah.
So speaking of the Trust, what's your involvement with them? Why did you get involved with the Trust? Tell me a little bit about that.
So I think I've been involved with the Trust for around 10 years, maybe a little under that. This is my second year mentoring someone. I'm working with a brilliant young journalist here in Cornwall called Danielle, and we're approaching, in fact, she's hosting this evening, and we're on the home straight of our year of working together. But I've been aware of the Trust for a good while. You know, needless to say, any organisation that's offering advice and guidance to people who are trying to come into our industry is going to be an organisation that I'm going to want to support, and I've been very proud to be part of the John Schofield Trust, very proud to be one of its mentors. And of course, you know, it's always worth emphasising, it's partly about us sharing some of the things we've learned along the way, but I learned plenty as well from my involvement in the Trust and speaking to people who are part of it. So I get a lot from it, and I'm very proud to be associated with it.
Yeah, it goes both ways.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, so I want to talk about your career, which has been quite broad, you know, from researching in South Africa, DJing in Brixton, and now being the BBC's analysis editor, so very varied. How did you kind of navigate, maybe more so the earlier years of your career, and is there anything that you kind of look back and wish that you'd known in those early years?
Goodness, there's a lot I wish I'd known. I don't think I navigated it particularly well, if I'm honest. I mean, I started at the BBC as a junior producer, a broadcast journalist, as we used to call them, at 5 Live, and I was 27 when I got that job, and it was my first full-time job as a news journalist. I had jobs working as different types of journalists. I used to edit websites for Carlton Television to go with their TV programmes before that, and a couple of other jobs. But I always wanted to be a news journalist, and I think I came out of university at 21, and it was 27. I was 27 when I got my first full-time news job. So I always wanted to be a news journalist, but I don't think I particularly took the most direct route. And one of the reasons that I don't think I managed to do that was I was struggling a bit on knowing what to do. Like my interest in the news was consistent all the way through my teens and my 20s. My commitment to being a news journalist was the same, but my knowledge of how to get there was really quite patchy. And one of the things reasons I'm so passionate about the John Schofield Trust is that the Trust is helping people access that information. And one of the things I wish I'd known back then was I don't have to work it all out on my own, and obviously along the way there were people who were very helpful, but I didn't really feel I knew exactly how to go about it. And it all adds up to the journalist that you are. If I look back, I think, goodness, if I could have been part of something like the John Schofield Trust, it would definitely have helped.
Yeah, it gives you a little bit more direction, because it's very much an industry where there's no really like straight line. You don't like come out of uni, then get this role, then get that role, then get something.
And I think, courses teaching journalism now are, quite different place to where they were 30 years ago. I don't have any journalism qualifications. I did history at university, and while history gives you lots of skills that translate across into journalism, one of the things I really felt as I was trying to come out of university and into the industry was I didn't really understand all the different roles. Within journalism there are hundreds of different disciplines, and they all require slightly different things, and I didn't even really understand the way that newsrooms were constructed. And as such, in the early days of trying to get going, I could feel myself wanting to work at one news organisation or another, but actually not really having a good sense of what role would be realistic for me to do. And I think when I speak to, and I expect this is going to be the case this evening as well, when I speak to people coming into the industry now, their understanding of their options is much better than mine was back then.
Yeah, but knowledge has kind of expanded a lot.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you specifically about your sort of more explainer style content, because I think it's something that when I was studying journalism at uni, I would sometimes struggle to grasp how to take these like often very complex topics and break them down into sort of engaging and accessible pieces of journalism. Do you have a specific approach going into that kind of work, or any tips that you want to share?
Yeah, I do have a specific approach, and I think, I would summarize it in a few steps. But I think the first thing is that, and this applies not just to explainers but to all stories, when we're producing an explainer or a story, we're not simply covering a subject, because within that subject there would be any number of dimensions to it, any number of angles we could take. And I think that I explain things better when I'm as clear as I possibly can be on the particular dimension of the story or the issue that I'm taking on. So the first thing I would try and demand of myself, and my colleagues are very good at pushing me on this as well, is what exactly are we trying to do here? Not I'm making an explainer about this story or subject, but within that, what exactly am I trying to do? Because when you can be as clear as possible on what you're trying to explain, you then start making smarter decisions about what to include. So that would be the first thing. The second thing would be, and again this applies to lots of types of journalism, not just explainers, really look hard at which information you need to include, because on any story or subject, more likely than not, there's far too much, there's far more than we can possibly include. And so if you can be clear on the purpose of what you're trying to explain, you're going to make better decisions about what to include and what not to include. And then the third thing I would try and say, and of course there are other things that we try and do as well when we're making explainers, is really think about how you're going to take the audience through the subject. At the beginning of the video or the text, the article or whatever it might be that you're producing, radio as well, you obviously set this up. You say, this event has happened, or this subject is being widely talked about. I'm going to look at it from this angle. So you're kind of telling the audience what you're going to do. But often within our efforts to tell that story, we'll have a structure. Most journalists, when they're writing a story or making a video or whatever it might be, will have a structure. We don't always share that structure. We know it, but we don't sometimes explicitly say it. And one of the things you'll see me doing quite often in our videos is, as I'm going between one section of the video and another, I will say, well, now we've considered that, we need to go on and consider this. Yeah. And by sharing the structure, if you like, I think that can be a helpful storytelling device for the audience to be able to position the different pieces of information that you're giving them. And certainly when I consume journalism, especially on complex stories, if I have a sense that the journalist who's telling me that story has a clear sense of purpose, and they are explaining to me the structure through which they are planning to unpack that particular issue or story, that helps me take in the information that they're passing on. And then the final point would be, and if we've been really strict about what information we want to pass on, we limit it to the essential information, and that's going to be easier to consume than if we have all the essential information and then quite a lot of other information mixed in.
Hi. This is a quick pause from the episode just to say that the John Schofield Trust is a charity, and if you want to support the work that we do and help the next generation of journalists break through, then you can head to www.johnscofieldtrust.org.uk/donate. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode. Okay, I have a couple more questions, then we do have to go. One of them is, you sort of founded the 50/50 project, which has now been adopted kind of internationally and across different sectors. How have you seen sort of diversity and equity change over the course of your career in the journalism industry?
Well, that's a big question, and it would warrant a longer discussion. I think the place that I started when a small group of us in the BBC newsroom were beginning what became the 50/50 project was a one core idea, which is that if you are hoping to explain the world, the events around us, to your audience, whoever that audience might be, if the people contributing within your journalism are representative of the world that you are trying to describe, that's going to be a helpful thing to do. It's going to be the right thing to do in the case of, certainly in the case of a public service media organisation like the BBC, but I would argue it's also going to benefit the quality of your journalism. And so that core idea for me remains exactly the same as it did back in 2016, early 2017 when we started 50/50. So you're right, the way that not just media organisations but lots of organisations go about issues of equality and diversity has evolved in the almost 10 years since we began 50/50. But actually the idea at the heart of it, which is that having sources within our journalism that are representative of the societies and the world that we're reporting on, that idea is the same now as it was then.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you have any final bits of advice that you would want to give early career journalists now? Is there anything that you kind of notice happening in the industry that you'd want to point out?
I don't think this is necessarily connected to a trend I see in the industry, but the thing I'll often say if people are asking me for advice is just make as much as you can. So at the early stages of your career, I would argue it's much more important to be making journalism. Obviously, we would hope that journalism reaches a huge audience, but even if it's not reaching a huge audience, there's still a huge benefit to you as a journalist starting out of making things, reviewing them. Was this good? Was this not good? What can I do next time? So one would be to make as much as you can. And I think actually making things is a lot easier now than it was when I was starting out because of the technology that's available to everyone. So one would be make as much as you can and review it as you go along. And the second would be look as far and wide as you can for people who are making content that works for you or is working for their audiences. Way beyond, look at news of course, but look way beyond news and think who's making content, who's telling stories in ways that are clearly proving to be effective and popular. Because one of the most useful things I've managed to do over the years is to do that and to take inspiration from a whole variety of different types of storytelling. Of course you don't just look at something and go, well, I'm going to wholesale just do that, because it almost certainly won't translate from the place where you're seeing it. It's the type of work you're doing. But it's more just be curious about the art of storytelling. And we can all as journalists learn, the internet, the digital world has brought this storytelling revolution, and there's huge amounts that we can learn from people inside journalism, but also way beyond journalism. And I think, I try to even at this stage in my career, I'm constantly on the lookout for, okay, who's doing, that's interesting they're doing it that way. That's interesting they're doing it that way. What could I learn from that? So make as much as you can and consume as much as you can.
Yeah, I like the idea of a storytelling revolution.
But it is a storytelling revolution, because if you look at the way that people are telling stories about the news and about lots of other subjects too on TikTok or on Instagram or on YouTube or on social media such as X. If you look at the way that news organisations are evolving, big established news organisations like the BBC or the New York Times and many, many others are evolving how they tell stories. And it's just an extraordinary array of different approaches to passing on information, and that's exciting.
It's true. My current favourite is a girl on TikTok, I've forgotten her name, which is really bad, but she breaks down news stories from the day while she gets changed, and she says where her outfit's from at the same time as doing that. And I think it's just so cool. I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, what a great idea, you're combining two different sort of spaces. But yes, there's lots of different sort of content out there to consume, especially for early career journalists to sort of draw inspiration from.
Yes.
And I think sometimes it can make the space feel a bit saturated, but it also means that there's, like you said, just so much inspiration to take and so much to consume.
It doesn't just feel saturated.
It is.
It is saturated. We are living in a world of infinite information, and AI is only going to increase that. Yeah. So that's not going anywhere. We are going to be surrounded by a whole range of high quality, mid quality, low quality information for the foreseeable future. That's not going to change. But I would just say that it therefore demands of all of us, whether we're journalists just starting out, whether we're been in the industry for a while, you've got to be at the top of your game, because if your storytelling, if your content is not really good, then people might pass it by. And I think one of the things that I've really learned, and sometimes learned the hard way, is with digital content, I saw I'm not going to remember the person who it was, but I saw a news executive in the US a couple of weeks ago saying good enough isn't enough. And I think that's really a crucial lesson of the digital world, that you could make something that is perfectly editorially sound. It's not factually incorrect. It's not, for us it would be, that's a good foundation, but actually to really connect and scale in a digital arena, you're going to probably need to do, your storytelling is going to be at the very top of your game. You're going to research is going to be at the very top of your game. Everything has got to be to a really high standard. And you could look at that and say, well, goodness, that sounds like quite a tough challenge. I suppose I would flip it around and be a bit more positive about that. I think the current arena that we're all working in is demanding that we are all at the top of our game. And as a consequence, if you look around the news media, you're seeing some extraordinary work, and journalists are rising to the challenge, and I think, but that is the challenge. Yeah,
absolutely. And like you said, there are more sort of like tools out there than ever before to help people make that content as well. So, it's balances out. On that, my final question is there any tool, book, podcast, resource that you would recommend early career journalists use?
So I'm going to give you a suggestion from Radio 4. So I co-present the media show with Katie Razzle on Radio 4, and it's of course a huge honour. There's another Radio 4 programme which I find really useful, which is called The Briefing Room with David Aronovich. And what it does is, across half an hour, it says there is this big issue, big story in the news, and we're going to spend a lot of time distilling this down. You've not tuned into this issue, we're going to walk you through it. And in half an hour, I always end up feeling a lot more confident and well briefed on that subject. And I think, though, as we've been discussing, we're in this kind of storytelling revolution, and the types of content that journalists are making is changing radically, and I'm not opposed to that at all. Still underpinning our work needs to be a deep understanding of the subjects that we're covering, and a understanding of the context in which stories are occurring. And anyone who watched Outside Source, which I did on the BBC News channel in the 2010s, will know we used to make a lot of time for context, because you need that to fully understand a news story. And so the Briefing Room on Radio 4, which is obviously a podcast as well on BBC Sounds, is a really great resource to just say, okay, I'm about to take on this subject. Before I do, let me spend half an hour on this. And then I always find if I listen to that, it just puts me in a great position to then go on and go into whichever particular angle of that story I'm doing.
There you go. So the Briefing Room, everybody got that, and also the John Schofield Trust podcast. So
that goes without saying.
Make sure you're listening to both of those. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Bye everyone. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to the John Schofield Trust podcast. For more episodes, make sure to follow us. Or if you want to know more about the Trust, head to www.johnscofieldtrust.org.uk and follow us on Instagram @John Schofield Trust. See you next time.